uh, this is a slideshow from the past. That's why it says part 6. I, as is so often the case, don't remember when I gave this slideshow, and especially 6 of them. And I just was looking through my file for something that would address ecological dynamics, and it didn't hurt that this one also had indigenous people. It doesn't go into any depth, certainly not on the indigenous people of our area. And I think the touch on ecology is rather light, but that's as much as we want for this length of a program. So that's why it says part 6 and such. This is a picture of the Methow River between Winthrop and Twisp that I didn't take. I think I got this off the web when I didn't take the name of the person who took it. But the point is the beauty and the complexity of our homeland. Yeah, speaking of complexity, so I was impressed in 2 ways by the slideshow, which I put together myself probably 4 years ago, 5, I don't know. And what impressed me, one was the complexity. So this is difficult for me. If I could turn to my notes, 7 pages, I would, but it's hard to do in a program like this. I've read them twice. I don't think I remember things as well as I used to. So that's one thing, is there are, there's just, to every fact, biological or geological fact of the earth, there's a story there, and it's best to have some foundation of information that you can work from to tell the story. And it's hard to remember that much. The other thing that repeatedly is striking me, that I think the theme of this is the dynamic earth that we live on, how dynamic it is, and change over time. And it's really both inspirational to me, powerfully touching, and unnerving how much things change over time. When you go through these stories, any history of the earth for an appreciable period of time, the changes are just massive. So this is the Methow. A lot of the rocks in the Methow are marine sediments. Well, where's the ocean? It's just how much things change over time. Yeah, as I think you know, we mentioned before, there are marine sediments at Hart's Pass, right along the road. Where if you know where the parking lot is, and then you walk up that last 200 yards, there are marine sediments in the rocks at the edge of the dirt road that you're walking along at 7,000 feet. And it wasn't a one-off event. It was not a one-off event. It changes constant. So I'm gonna have to glance at my notes. So obviously this was all covered with ice. Not very long ago. The Pleistocene Ice Age lasted a little over 2 million years. There were 4 or 5 major glacial advances, with ice coming down from our 51st state, Canada, and completely inundating the Methow Valley. I would say 14,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, it melted 13,000 years ago. Marine fossils on the high peaks. So the ocean was here, ice was here. The dynamics of the ecosystem, it's a fire evolved ecosystem that dries out and burns. That came up somewhere in my notes. I ran into the story of fire. There was no fire on Earth until there was plant life. There was nothing to burn. There were plenty of billions of years with no plants. Again, how much things change over time, you just can't keep track. So fire is an emergent quality of life on Earth. Fire is totally tied to life. That's what burns living things. Rocks don't burn, although they do get molten. But when they cool, they're still rocks. So I couldn't help but think of the fire in LA That's a fire-evolved ecosystem. There's nothing more natural there than fire. And I guess it maybe illustrates how out of tune we are with ecological reality. You know, as Don and I talked about before we started the recording, we aren't born with an ecological handbook. We just, the other animals don't need one. I don't know why we do. So that's maybe a long introduction to this. I'm going to move along. So it's a 6-part program. That's because this is part of a previous program that I did, which is actually an ecological history of North America. You know, it's a wonderful subject. I have a book upstairs. It's on the ecological history of North America by Tim Flannery. I can't remember the name of the book, but it is so good. I've read it at least 3 times because these facts don't stick. So we're thinking about ecology. So and the history of the planet. Well, one theme that emerges is change over time. Everything changes over time. So this is actually a quote by Marcus Aurelius 2,000 years ago, you know, a famous Roman. The larger quote is, "Time is a river of passing events, and strong is its current. No sooner is a thing brought into sight than it is swept away, and another takes its place, and this too will be swept along." So it's just a theme that I think it's an ecological theme, it's a reality theme, and it's difficult for us because change for us is difficult. Another theme that comes out when I look over the whole picture of what we've been talking about is that life is rare in the universe. The average temperature in the universe is said to be, I've never been there, minus 450 degrees Fahrenheit, where I would say biological reactions don't take place. So today's you just happen to be in the right place. It is possible. We don't know if I think I have here coming up things like the number of galaxies in the universe, really uncountable. So is there other life? We don't know of any other life in the universe. And it takes a very refined, sophisticated collection of circumstances for life to be possible. I thought I had it in here. It must come up later, but the temperature of the sun is in the millions. The temperature of space is minus 450. And the average temperature of the Earth is 69 degrees. Goldilocks would love it. It's just right. It comes out here. So I think these kinds of facts, and they would be endless. I think there's maybe 3 here in number. Really, it just should blow our minds. It just should blow our minds. So the sun's burning 600 billion tons of hydrogen a second. And it's been doing it for 4 billion years. How is that possible? It's just incomprehensible. So, you know, I use the term burning loosely. It's fusing hydrogen into helium, but it's releasing energy. There's less mass in the helium, and that mass turns into energy, and it's radiated out into the universe. And I have it written down. We get some minuscule, less than a millionth of the sun's output hits the Earth, and that's what makes life possible on the Earth. It's the next best thing to a miracle, I'm telling you. So you look up in the sky. I don't know how they even knew there was a galaxy. I guess, you know, our earlier people, they could see they were stars. I don't know that they knew it was a galaxy. They didn't even know they were stars. They would look like little puncture marks in a black ceiling, the stars. But at some point we figured out we were in a galaxy called the Milky Way. You cannot see the Milky Way when you're in it, as I showed a picture of that. I mean, I showed a picture of the Andromeda Galaxy and said it was a Milky Way. We can't take a picture of our own galaxy because we're immersed in it. We thought there was only one galaxy. Look how much things have changed. This is 100 years ago. Just 100 years ago, after human beings had been on the planet for 200,000 years, we realized that there's infinite number of galaxies. They're up to 2 to 5 trillion. We don't know. Can't count that high. So these are just, to me, amazing facts that I think should blow my mind. They should do something. Sorry, I spelled temperature wrong there. So the sun's 27 million degrees at the center. The space is minus 450 degrees. And the temperature of the Earth is 69 degrees Fahrenheit, the average temperature. They call it, well, they call it the habitable zone. The other planets are not in the same zone. The other planets are not 69 degrees by any stretch of the imagination. Call it the Goldilocks effects. Goldilocks would like 69 degrees. That's a perfect temperature for a room, and that's the average temperature overall for the Earth. But given these extremes of the cold in space, the heat of the sun, it's touching, it's impressive that the temperature on Earth is just right for chemical processes to take place and for life to exist. So these are, I guess, a short list of, actually it fills the page here, I remember, of ecological facts of life that we don't think of very often. It's interesting. I think we'd be a little better off if these kinds, if we could feel the truth of these facts. So energy comes from the sun. I suppose that's not a big surprise, but you know, our energy does not come from the sun. Our energy comes from fossil fuels. I would say 99% of the energy that runs our lives is fossil fuels. Well, that is solar energy that's been captured by photosynthesis, but it's no longer solar energy, it's chemical energy. And it's finite. And we don't understand that at all. Or you would not have that traffic jam on Interstate 5 in Seattle every day. It cannot last. And I don't spend very much time on that kind of thing, but I've, for many years, been impressed by the unsustainability of the way that we live. So it's said that Homo sapiens is 200,000 years old, you know, give or take. Probably for almost all but 150 years, we lived on the energy available on the Earth, on solar energy. Now we do not. And the population of humanity, of Homo sapiens, has exploded in that time from less than 1 billion to 8 billion. And that 8 billion is supported by fossil fuels, which again, I don't spend very much time dealing with the dreary facts of life. So energy is critical for living organisms, living systems, ecosystems. Water is as well. Energy flows into the ecosystem from the sun, is utilized, captured as well as possible. And actually, it's said 1% of the energy hitting the Earth is captured by living organisms and by photosynthesis. 1%. The rest is reflected as heat back into the atmosphere and into space. But that's okay. It works. Water flows. We don't think of that so much, but we might think about it this year because I think until this snowfall, I didn't look today, I didn't think of it, but the snowpack at Harts Pass was about 65% of normal yesterday. Well, we take the water flowing through our ecosystem for granted, but it changes. Everything changes. Some years there'll be floods, some years there'll be drought. So life needs nutrients, particular nutrients, and they don't flow so much as they cycle back and forth, like carbon cycles from the sky to the ground to life, back to the sky. Nitrogen, same thing. The atmosphere is 79% nitrogen. Nitrogen is critical to life. Living things cannot live without nitrogen. They don't need a lot of it. They need a lot of carbon, but they don't need a lot of nitrogen. But where are you going to get it? It's locked up in the atmosphere as a molecule, N2, and it's only nitrogen-fixing bacteria that can break it in half. So all life on the planet is dependent on these nitrogen-fixing bacteria and on the nitrogen in the atmosphere. There's no waste in ecosystems. it's an interesting, to me, it's always been a fascinating thought to think that there's no garbage. Where at river camp, the kids ask, or maybe it was in the school program, I don't know, kids will ask. No, I ask the kids, where does nature put its garbage? And they just can't figure it out. Where is that garbage? But how could we have so much and nature has so little? I'm shocked at my garbage bag. It's just full of plastic, completely full of plastic. It's little pieces of plastic, but it just continually adds up. It's not the way nature works. There's no garbage in nature. Ecosystems have limiting factors, have to have a certain amount of water, certain amount of sunlight, not too much water, not too much sunlight. Temperature has to be 69 degrees, has to be within a very limited range, given the range in the universe, very limited. Has to have nutrients. Ecosystems incorporate natural selection. That's termed from Darwin originated survival of the fittest, that life is constantly adapting to the dynamics of the planet in which that living thing finds itself. And if it's well adapted, actually it'll reproduce. And if it's not well adapted, it'll die before it reproduces. If it dies before it reproduces, it will not pass on the particular combination of genes, unique combination of genes in that living organism that were not adequately adapted to the environment as it is. Well, it brings up the phenomenon of change again. The environment, the physical environment of the earth changes constantly. And so life has to adapt to that change or it dies. And then there is symbiosis, which is a little more cheerful than death, that life constantly works together. We'll talk a little bit about that. There's a carrying capacity for any ecosystem. And again, the fact that the number of Homo sapiens on the planet is 8.3, 8.4 billion. It's only because of fossil fuels that the human population has reached that level. We are in overshoot. That's an ecological term. There's a great book called Overshoot. It's old now. It was written in 1980, but I still love it. Written by I forget his name, but he was a professor at Washington University. Anyhow, the fact that it's a carrying capacity suggests that life is a relationship. You can't have one species. You can't have just 10 species. You need a community of life that interacts with the nutrients and the energy and passes the goods around. So number 8 here, ecosystems mysteriously evolve towards self-improvement. Well, people might disagree with that, but ecosystems have a way of growing richer over time. There was no life on land. I should have looked up the megatons of biomass on the planet right now. It would just be gargantuan. But it was partly life that improved the habitability of the land in various ways, by capturing nutrients, by stocking the soil with humus so that when it rained, the moisture was retained. Life has a way of enriching ecosystems over time. This is a map of North America over time, and the point is that it has accreted over time, and I put a red X, I'm going to bring it up, in the middle of that gray area. That was the original, that's all that existed originally of the North American continent. And I think the best theme here is, again, the dynamics of the planet and change over time. Everything changes over time. This is not the final picture. We tend to see what we have before us as, well, last thing settled down. That's not the case. That everything is dynamic in the natural world, and everything changes over time. So in the early Earth, there were not continents. There were land masses that rose above the crust of the Earth, because they had evolved lighter constituents like silicon, which melts at a lower temperature than heavier molecules and heavier elements like iron. And so the silica melted out and formed more high silica rock, which is less dense than low silica rock. the high silica rock floats on the ocean crust and becomes continents. Well, that process has increased over time, and the continents have increased over time in size. And if we could look at the timing there, this goes back 4 billion years and then up to the present as the dynamics of the planet continue to emerge. So there is this gneiss. Gneiss is a type of metamorphic rock that's related to granite. You can see it looks a little bit like granite, but everything's in straight lines because the heating it under pressure back to a molten state allowed the different elements to line up in a particular way. So all the silica is in one line and the orthoclase is in another line, and because they attract one another chemically. This is the oldest rock on the planet, 3.8 billion years old. Well, the planet's only a little over 4 billion years old, so this is a pretty old rock. And it's a craton that it would have been one of the early cratons that the North American continent formed around. Other than that, so I just brought up that rock on the upper right. That's from the moon. That rock was brought from the moon. And of course, it was examined by Homo sapiens because we are, to our credit, extremely curious. And they found, I don't know if I can find that. I don't have that page numbered. They found quartz in it and some other very Earth-like minerals. And there's really no quartz on the moon. And so the question arose, where did this come from? And it's some of the evidence that a planetesimal, actually bigger than an asteroid, a planetesimal is a small planet, seems to have, the evidence is smashed into the Earth in the early universe when the solar system had a lot more rocks flying around. It hadn't cleaned itself up, literally. This planetesimal smashed into the Earth and blew the Earth's crust, which had a lot of silica in it, out into orbit. It was held by the gravity of the Earth. It went into orbit and it formed the moon. So this rock is taken as evidence for that collision. And everything has repercussions. That blew the early Earth crust out into space or around the Earth. Some of those elements were heavier elements. The Earth hadn't had time to differentiate into a lighter crust and a heavier mantle. And it's thought that if we had not been, this would be a typical Goldilocks effect. Everything is just right for life on Earth. If that planetesimal had not smashed into the Earth 4 billion years ago, then the Earth's crust probably would not be capable of moving, of plate tectonics. I actually forget the exact facts of the matter, but there is that relationship between the planetesimal smashing into the Earth and blowing some of the heavy elements of the crust out into space. So then you got these continental plates, remembering the story, continental plates, which are less dense than the ocean plate because certain elements melt out at lower temperatures, including silica and forming quartz. So you ended up with rock masses that floated on the ocean crust, and we call them continents. Well, some of that rock is on the moon. So this is a little hard to comprehend, but it goes from, this is North America, the evolution of North America over, I'm not sure how many years, probably a billion, from upper left to lower right. Lower right, we recognize that landmass. We might recognize the previous four. Might not recognize this one on the left, third one down, which looks like a bunch of islands. But this is the evidence of what North America has gone through over the years. It's changed dramatically over a billion years. So the bottom picture in the middle, that's the Pleistocene Ice Age. That's a massive, massive continental glacier coming down from our 51st state, Canada, into North America. And that had major, major impacts the Methow Valley was completely filled with ice. You can kind of see that northwestern United States where it would be, if you can see my cursor flying around there, is covered with ice, although there's a land corridor that was, I don't think it was always there, but it did appear as the ice started to melt. And that land corridor was rather handy because humans crossed over the Bering land bridge and came down that land corridor. That's the only reason that the Methow tribe ever got here. So I pulled up that red arrow just now in the upper right because I wanted to emphasize the fact that there was this inland seaway, that the center part of the United States, this must have been before the Rockies rose, was an ocean. And I have a picture that comes up a little later of where coal is in the United States. This is it. This is where the coal is. A lot of the coal. There's coal in the Appalachians, and that would be a different dynamic that we might even be able to find on this map. I don't know. But this was a shallow sea. And with a lot of shoreline where plants grew, and it created both petroleum and coal. Ice Age, 2.5 million years ago. So everything that exists evolved over time. There was no planet Earth. There was no solar system. That's the scientific evidence. Even that kind of thing gets to a point that's hard to comprehend, but that seems to be true. I hadn't actually noticed looking at this before, but I see the states lines are superimposed over here. This is North America, I guess 470 million years ago. So these would be cratons of lighter rock floating on the ocean crust. And the rest of North America has accreted over time, which is why there are marine fossils in the Methow Valley, because it's a work in progress. See, here's Washington over here. If you can see my cursor, it's all ocean, shallow ocean. That's why there's marine fossils there. So everything that we have before us didn't used to be there. There was no such thing as the plant kingdom. Plants have evolved over time, and they've evolved from peak precursors. In fact, it's thought that life only appeared once on the planet and that all life is related. Nobody knows how life appeared. It diversified over time and diversified into kingdoms, including the plant kingdom of fungi, which of course break down the products of organic matter, animal kingdom, and single-celled organisms, bacteria and archaea, which we looked at pictures of those previously. So I guess one thing here is you can, to some degree, at least imagine the evolutionary journey that life has taken. This picture of a plant it's not a plant, actually, it's an algae in the upper right. It's called stonewort. It looks like a horsetail. It's very common in the Methow. Peregrine Lake is full of it. Most of our lakes are full of this particular stonewort. And it's not our idea of algae, but it just builds a lot of silica that it absorbs from the water into its physical structure. So it has a capacity to hold itself upright, and it looks like a plant, but it's not a plant. But it is photosynthetic. Algae were earlier photosynthesizers before plants existed. But it looks an awful lot like a plant that did evolve and came out of the water and managed to learn to live on dry land, which means any plant that lives on dry land has to find a way to retain moisture within the body of the plant and not dry out, not desiccate, at least not for too long a time. We do have some plants that just dry out. Even in the Methow, there are plants that just dry out, and then when it rains, they come back to life. But mostly the plant kingdom doesn't do that. So I guess one point here is you can kind of imagine the evolutionary steps to get from this algae, which has no roots, it has to be immersed in water, to these plants that live at the water's edge, but do have roots and can live out in the atmosphere. More North America. This is North America accreting over time. 350 million years ago. Remember our plate tectonics at the ocean plates are subducting because they're made out of heavier, denser materials. They meet the continent, which has been fractionated into lighter materials. When the two meet, the ocean crust subducts. Well, if there's continental crust embedded on that ocean crust, like these ocean arcs, like Japan would be an ocean arc, right? These look like Japan. They look like the Philippines. They're embedded on the ocean crust. The ocean crust is subducting onto the continent. This continental crust is going to accrete onto the continent. And that is the short story of where North America came from. I have a great picture of that, but I don't know if it's in the slideshow. So this is the coal deposits, the upper picture, coal deposits in the United States, and they're right where that inland sea was. All that was inland sea at one point, which is where the coal came from, and the gas deposits, the petroleum deposits, which have a different source, but still come from water bodies. And this is a coal seam in Alaska, and it shows the accumulation of organic matter visually. That would burn, of course, and the variation over time. What happened in between these two coal seams? That's probably 100 million years, the planet just decides to try something else and it deposits whatever that is. It's probably sandstone, but there's no coal in it. So there's just one picture of the dramatic change that constantly occurs on the planet. So I should make the point that coal is derived from plant matter, that falls into water, which tends to be rather anaerobic. There's not oxygen in the water, so it doesn't decompose, and it's compressed over time by more sediment that is falling on top of this plant matter that fell into the water, and it forms sediments over time. It's compressed, might be heated as it's drawn down into the depths of the earth, not to the center by any stretch, but down into the crust. And that organic matter is somehow transformed into petroleum. Whereas, I don't think petroleum is derived from phytoplankton. Natural gas, this should say natural gas. Natural gas is derived from phytoplankton, which is just, another organic living organism, microscopic, but by the billions that accumulate in ocean basins and are covered by sediment and pressed down into the crust and cooked over time by the heat of the earth. And the hydrocarbons remain too, and will burn if you can recover them. So this is a picture of the Pacific Northwest coast, the lower picture, the color picture, the Pacific Northwest coast. And the idea of it is to illustrate where all that land came from. These are all land masses that we call terranes. That word is written there, Terrane, that were independent land masses that were embedded on the ocean crust. They were continental crust, like we showed in some previous pictures. So they move along on the crust. When the crust subducts onto the continent, the continental rock is scraped off and left on the continent. So these are all individual terranes that have built over time and constructed the Pacific Northwest coast. I think this is obviously Alaska, but I circled this is the same thing here. You can see Alaska is primarily composed of terranes, and there's outlines of some of these terranes, like this one here. Little dance music there. So all of this Midwest United States was either inland seaway, shallow sea, seashore at the time of the dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs are abundant in there, and it's sedimentary rock that of like the Grand Canyon, just innumerable layers of sediment that accumulated over time. Same with this sandstone and Capitol Reef. It was a sea, was an inland sea. Again, a measure of how much things change over time. Kansas down the bottom there, sandstone accumulated at the edge of the inland sea. There's a picture of the inland sea in the upper left. So flowering plants are arguably the dominant plants. Well, I guess that's not actually the case. A dominant taxonomic group of plants on the planet, but they are something relatively new on the planet. They've only existed for the last, it says here, well, it says 150 years. That's about right. 150 years. So this graph on the bottom goes back to 400 million years ago, 300 million years ago. No plants. I mean, no flowering plants. There were ferns, there were conifers. Flowering plants appeared relatively recently. You know, if the history of the Earth were a year, flowering plants probably appeared in the middle of December. There's something new on the planet. There, so I hesitated there because in terms of diversity, flowering plants have by far the greatest diversity of plant life on the planet. There are about 350 species, 350, wait, oh gosh. I think it's 350,000 species of flowering plants. Conifers existed long before flowering plants. There's something like 500 species of conifers. So conifers have taken a beating by the evolution of flowering plants, but the biomass of the two is probably approximately equal. The flowering plants dominate the temperate zone and the tropics, but the conifers dominate all the northern hemisphere. This is temperature change over time, and I never quite get over this fact of how much temperature has changed over time. So at the bottom is millions of years ago from now to 500 million years ago, 542 million years ago on the right. And this is evidence probably from, I don't know, ice cores and other places of the change in temperature over time. So the point is just the level of change. And down here, these little boxes are glacial periods. Glacial period, glaciers melt, no glacial period, glacial period, no glacial period. So right now, this shows a descent into colder temperatures over a very long period of time, say 50, 100 million years of time. The point is really just how much things change over time. And every time there's a change in our short lives, we're shocked. We think it's something extraordinary and terrible, but it's the nature of life, nature of this dynamic planet for things to change over time. That is a Dawn redwood fossil in the upper left, and bald cypress might be an actual photograph of bald cypress. So while both of these species used to exist in the Met Howe, they're fossils of Dawn redwoods and bald cypress in Pipestone Canyon. So just for them to exist, well, Dawn redwood takes moisture and I would say mild temperatures. I have 2 Dawn redwoods in the basement right now. You can buy them on Amazon. It was thought to be extinct. I think I talked about that previously. And then found in 1944 a grove of dawn redwoods was found in a valley in China, and now the seeds are spread all over the world. So I have two in the basement because they cannot survive this 2 feet of snow on the ground and freezing temperatures, but I'm going to plant them in the spring. They can take freezing temperatures, but they probably can't take zero. In any case, they used to be here. There's dawn redwood fossils in the Met Howe, but those are 60 million years old. And same with the bald cypress. It was a different climate at the time because things change constantly. This is a page on the evolution of grass. That's a drawing of grass. Those are probably grass biomes. So grass is a flowering plant. It's recently evolved. What did we say for flowering plants? Flowering plants evolved 150 million years ago. Grasses appeared about 60 million years ago. So they're fairly recent on a relative scale, a recent innovation. Well, grasses are what our grains are. Grasses store grass seeds have that endosperm like wheat and corn and barley that store energy. So that they aren't just a new evolutionary turn, but they're a new source of food for living things. So there are numerous species of mammals that evolved to eat grasses, and there's a drawing on a schematic on the lower right of the evolution of horses, which have hypsodont teeth. Grass has silica in it, not a lot. It's not a rock. It's probably a defense against herbivory to pull up that silica, or it's just part of the structure of the plant. It wears teeth away because it's such a hard element. Well, horses have teeth called hypsodont teeth that never stop growing. They wear away. They don't grow back so much as they never stop growing. They have evolved to be able to eat grasses. So they have co-evolved with grasses. So there's a chimp down on the lower right. And the story with the chimp is that as grasses evolved, the plant communities shifted. I don't know that. Well, it's partly because of plants, partly because of grass. A problem for plants is fire. If you form a forest and grow to 150 years old, and then you have a dry summer, it'll just burn down, and your 150 years of growth are destroyed. Plants have co-evolved with fire. Plants dry out every summer. Plants are ready to burn in August. But the plant itself tends to survive unless it's a super hot, unnatural, I mean, far from the norm fire. Grass comes up again in the spring. I have beautiful pictures of our blue bunch wheatgrass coming up on our shrub steppe hills after the fire burned in the summer, goes through the fall and the winter, and then the spring. The whole hillside turns green again with these grasses that survive. But all of the shrubs were killed. All of the sagebrush was killed. All of the bitterbrush was killed. They're not as fire evolved. And so fire and grass co-evolve together. Well, with the advent of grasses spreading across the savanna or the landmass of Central Africa, some of the forest was burned down and became grassland savanna. And it is thought, it sounds slightly unbelievable, but that's part of why primates came down out of the trees. The saying is that primates didn't leave the trees left the primates. It just got drier and grasses took over, burned up the trees, and it's part of the evolutionary story of our genetic line because we are almost 99% related to chimpanzees. Time check. Uh, this is an elephant that lived in North America. Look at those tusks. Oh my gosh, those must be sexually selected. I don't know what you would do with those other than scare away competitors. And there's a real picture. Look at these up here. Look at how huge those are. So this, I guess, shows the range of this zygolophodon. But it existed. So well, this elephant was in North America, but we know the mastodons were in North America and the mammoths were in more North America. So again, a measure of change over time. North America was full of elephants. We don't think of North America that way. They're not here now. So Mount Rainier, I was reading the notes on that this morning. So these are a byproduct of the subducting continental crust, ocean crust, right? The ocean crust is being jammed on the continent. It's pulled down into the mantle. It melts, heat rises, and that molten rock reappears. And so this lower map shows the line of volcanoes all along the Pacific coast because of the subduction of the ocean crust under the continental plate. But the thing about, I was reading about Mount Rainier is that it's considered to be one of the most dangerous mountains in the world, dangerous for humanity. Um, I don't know if I can nail down the reasons, but there have been enormous, when it erupts, which is, let's find it here, Rainier. So here it erupted 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago. Eruption, eruption, eruption. 200 years ago, it does erupt. It's a live volcano. All that ice melts, and you get these debris flows down the side of the volcano and into the tributary water systems. Well, people live in all those places, especially on the west side. And if it erupts, it's just a ticking time bomb. It's beautiful, but it's a ticking time bomb. This is a little graphic of human evolution, which is related to the advent of the grasses, which to some degree are an anti-tree. Grasses have been called the anti-tree because grasses promote fire, but they aren't killed by fire. But the trees are killed. So grasses, to some degree, replaced forests in Central Africa, drove certain primates out of the trees because there were no trees, and created this evolutionary journey. So what we have here are chimpanzees over on the right, and that goes back this almost sort of green color. There's a split here at 6 million years ago. That's when okay, so it is saying, I couldn't remember for sure, but humans and chimps split 6 million years ago. That's not that long ago. And that's why we share 99% of the same genes with chimpanzees. And I'll say briefly, I watched a video. You can Google anything and you'll get good videos on the lives of chimpanzees. They are extremely violent against other troops of chimpanzees. They'll just rip one another apart. It's just astonishing. And we have that to deal with in our genetic inheritance. It's not the only thing, but it is there. And, at the moment, we're not dealing with it all that well. No, but we're not at one another's throat, but we know about the wars, terrible wars that are raging. And don't bring up nuclear weapons very often, but I think the United States and Russia have 5,000 nuclear weapons apiece. So you may remember this little guy I just brought up on the bottom left, the Makapanska pebble. It's a naturally formed rock that was carried a long distance into a cave in South America. The interpretation is very much widely agreed. It was carried there by an Australopithecus, a primate previous to our genus and to our species, Australopithecus, because it looked like it looked like an Australopithecus. It has two eyes and a mouth. It's known that rock formation is nowhere near that cave. It carried it something, I don't know, long miles, 50 miles. The point is, it's a symbolic act. It's taken as the first evidence, and unfortunately, I forget how old that Makapanska pebble is, several million years old. The first evidence of symbolic thought in the human evolutionary line. And we mentioned briefly language at the start of the slideshow, and maybe we mentioned symbolic thought. Language is all symbols. Language is never the thing that we're talking about, ever. I think I might have said last time, the word tree is not a tree. We're so immersed in language that it's very difficult now for us to differentiate And I think that's why the physical world is taking a beating from the human species, is because we really live in a world of symbols, of thought. This is a tortilla with the image of Jesus in it. Now, that sounds ridiculous, but you may know that in Mexico, at times, people have gotten very excited about about Jesus appearing in a tortilla. They make little shrines and put them in glass cases. It's just the power of symbolic thinking. We just make things up. We just fabricate things. And here's one where Elvis appeared in a tortilla, but that's just a joke. The point is to illustrate how powerful symbolic thought is to us. We live in a world of symbolism. Let's see. We need a number here. I know we're getting short on time. So humans evolved in Africa. That's pretty well established. They migrated out of Africa. That upper left shows the migration of, I guess, probably Homo sapiens. It was Homo erectus that first left Africa and got quite widespread. In any case, there were several migrations out of Africa. And then across the Bering Land Bridge was all frozen. People just walked from Siberia to Alaska. It says there, well, 14,000, 13,000, 12,000 years ago. So that's how humans got to North America. This is a map of the San Francisco Bay Area where I grew up. The map, the yellow one I just pulled up. You can't see it very well, but every one of those words is a tribe. They differentiated so dramatically into numerous tribes with all of the attributes of different tribal people, different languages, different customs, and live side by side. It was probably one of the most complex societies that's probably ever lived on the planet. And that's partly because of the richness of the ecosystem there. It just, the food just fell from the trees, was available on the coast. This is a map of Native American impact on the North American continent. It's not comprehensive. It's just to point out that humans, the Native American people, had big impacts on the North American continent. Nothing like our culture, but still big. So the central area that's red was ecosystems where they've burned them. They burned the ecosystems every year because there were advantages to the fresh young plants that came up. Some of that would have been forested. Certainly the eastern portion of that was forested. The natives lit fires. They lit fires on the East Coast. They lit fires in California and altered the ecosystem. And the little green-blue color in the lower left is irrigation systems in the Southwest. So this, I'm going to go back on this. This shows indigenous culture in North America over time. And that the point is how it, of course, just that they inhabited the whole of North and South America and then were removed by our culture and put on reservations, which are the red that remain at the end there. And all their land was taken away. I mean, I'm not trying to be morose here. It's just, it's partly competition. It's what organisms do. They compete. It's not the final word in the evolution of life. Organisms also cooperate intensely, and there are other aspects of life, like love does exist. So we don't have time for too much here. This is just a graphic, a slide on photosynthesis. And I mentioned this previously because photosynthesis is probably the single most important life activity on the planet. It's where all the food comes from. 99.9% of all food is a product of photosynthesis, which is plant life and algae capturing the energy of the sun and binding it in chemical bonds, which then become available if that plant is digested, the energy is released. That's why we can walk around, because we ate plants. So the picture in the middle I think I mentioned this before, but it's a little video that I like. What's it called? Photosynthesis. I think it's called photosynthesis at MIT. This is a graduate at MIT, and he's got a seed in his hand and a piece of wood. And the person who from came from someplace like Harvard, and they're filming these students. Students do not have a clue. They don't have a clue where wood came from. He's got wood in his hand. She said, "Where did it come from?" He says, "Dirt." It's a great video. I just love it. It just illustrates once again how far we are from understanding the dynamics of our planet. So we are almost done. So that process of photosynthesis captures the energy of the sun in chemical bonds and uh, carbon. So this is at Scatter Lake. It's all rocks. If you've been to Scatter Lake, it's all there is are a few trees and rocks. But this is a tree that grew, died, fell over, and is turning into humus and is changing the structure of the soil. You can imagine that tree is going to hold moisture infinitely better than the rocky ground. And that's one of the byproducts of plant life and photosynthesis. Everything cycles. We don't think about it very often, but it's a fact of life. Everything cycles. This is illustrates how we don't think about it. The bottom picture is a picture of garbage. There's a guy in a boat. I don't know where he is. I'm going to guess Philippines. Not to slander the Philippines. We just are not conscious of the ecological facts of life. This is out of a book, another of my favorite books called The Human Error Handbook. I have several copies if anybody wants to borrow one. But this is the upper left. This is how we eat. We eat. Oh no, that's the wrong one. The upper right. Eat, poop in a toilet. The toilet goes into the water and pollutes the water. And then we use chemical fertilizers to grow plants. The cycle is broken. Whereas the natural cycle of things is that the nutrients that give us our life go back into the soil and enrich the soil and grow life again. So it becomes a cycle. And I don't know why we're so tuned out to that, but we tend to be. Obviously, we are near the end. Oh, that's 31. Maybe we aren't near the end. Well, we're going to speed up. We got to get done here. This is interesting because this is Mount St. Helens, and I might have a picture of it blowing here. Nothing. This guy got killed in his car 15 miles away. This is what it looked like 10 years later. So it's one of the strange twists and turns of the planet is that disasters often lead to renewed life. It's very Oh, this is the end. Good. Wow, we're only 3 minutes late. Pale blue dot. I may have shown this picture before. I like it. It's one that Sagan shows. He has a video called Pale Blue Dot. You can see it on YouTube. He talks about the Earth being a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. I have an arrow that points at where the Earth is. But this is where all of this drama takes place on this mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. It's just hard to comprehend, but we're glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Dana. We are glad to be here. Um, well, that was a lot to take in, traveling over 4.5 billion years of our history and in the making. One of the things you said in the beginning that really struck me is that the Earth, journey becomes increasingly complex, and our understanding of what has happened over history continues. So we still have a lot to learn, but thank you so much. I will just comment that there are some comments in the chat if you have a chance to take a look.
Oh yeah,
Um
I will. Yeah, I see there's 11.
yeah, Stephen shared some great photos, well, a beautiful photo of Dawn redwoods in Beijing in the botanical garden.
Down here in the chat or somewhere.
Yeah, in the chat.
Yeah, I'll take a look.
It was
And yeah,
spring
even
of
I don't know
last
if I
year.
synergy. Yeah, working together. I don't think I use the word synergy. I don't use it very much, but he's saying something about symbiosis. The word symbiosis means life together. And life is a symbiotic journey. We would not be alive without symbiotic activity of organisms inside of us and outside of us. Uh, but we're out of time.
There's always more. There's always more, which
There
is
is always more, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
so you mentioned, but a remarkable thing is for all of our faults, think of the stunning reality that humanity has been able to figure out the evolutionary journey of life on Earth with only clues, no, no books. There were no books. Everything's been figured out by the human mind. It just really astonishes me how intelligent we are as a species,
Hmm.
if not as individuals.
And we have a lot more to learn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do.
I would
I
in,
think
I,
we do.
I would invite everyone. I know we're at the end of our time, but if anyone wanted to unmute themselves and has a comment or a question, um, and I know we all just want to say thank you, Dana, for your time and energy putting this together.
Yeah, Stephen notes there's Don Redwoods in where are you saying? In Beijing?
Yes.
There's Don Redwoods everywhere. There's Don Redwoods on the University of Washington campus. There's Don Redwoods in my basement.
Well, we look
They've
forward to
gotten
seeing them.
they've gotten around. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they're deciduous. They have no needles, but they'll leaf out in the spring. I'm excited by them. That's the way to be, you know. You want to be excited by life.
Yeah, it will be great to see them in your yard one day.
Bye, Rob. Thanks for checking in. Das Vedanya. That's goodbye in Russian.
Yep. Thanks.
Andy, you found a way in. Good.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for checking in.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Nancy.
Yeah.
I'm going to read the chat if it holds up. Thanks, Donna.
Yes, thank you, Dana, so much. It was
Yeah,
great. And we'll get this recording posted and up on the YouTube site. As your final one, that was a lot. Thank you so much.
yeah. Praise the Lord. I'm done.
You did it. And you relearned again. I love your
Oh
comment.
my gosh. I
You
can't
love to
believe
relearn. Yeah.
that's the saving grace.
Yeah.
It's almost as much fun to relearn these things. They're so beautiful and so exciting.
Yeah.
It's just mildly discouraging that you can't retain it, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's the way it goes.
But yeah, understandable. It's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Hope you go off to enjoy a nice afternoon and all this new beautiful snow that we've had.